Touch my wife again, and you answer to me." Luciano Costa's calm voice sliced through the marble conference hall with more force than a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every armed capo froze. For one impossible heartbeat, even the men who had spent their lives settling disagreements with bullets simply stared. Moments earlier, no one had noticed the curvy housekeeper standing near the doorway, clutching a leather folder against her chest. Now every eye in the room was fixed on her. Unfortunately, she had absolutely no idea why. Chloe Mercer had one simple job: deliver the forgotten documents to Mr. Costa before his meeting ended. That was all. No speeches, no conversations, definitely no accidental involvement in mafia politics. She balanced the heavy folder against her hip while muttering to herself. Walk in, put it on the table, smile. Leave before someone asks why the coffee tastes better when I make it. She smiled despite her own nerves. Talking to herself had become a habit years ago. When people underestimated you because of your size, you either learned to laugh first, or let them laugh for you. Chloe had chosen laughter. Most days it worked. Today, not so much. The massive oak doors had been left slightly open. Inside, nearly 30 of the most powerful mafia leaders on the East Coast surrounded a polished table covered in maps, contracts, and untouched whiskey glasses. The air felt heavier than a thunderstorm. Luciano Costa sat at the head of the table. His charcoal suit looked perfectly pressed despite the 6-hour negotiation. He hadn't raised his voice once. He didn't need to. Everyone else did enough shouting for him. Across from him, Don Marco Bellini slammed his fist onto the table. "You expect my family to surrender 3 ports?" Luciano answered without changing expression. "I expect your family to survive another year." Silence. The kind that always came before dangerous decisions. That was exactly the wrong moment for Chloe to knock. She tapped gently. No one heard. She pushed the door open another few inches. Still nothing. "Excuse me." 30 dangerous men turned simultaneously. "Oh." She immediately wished she had stayed in bed. "I brought the documents Mr. Costa forgot." Nobody moved. Nobody smiled. One capo slowly blinked. Another reached toward the pistol beneath his jacket out of pure instinct. Luciano looked at the folder. He had indeed forgotten it. Before he could say anything, Don Bellini's patience finally disappeared. "For God's sake!" He strode toward Chloe in 3 long steps. "Who allowed a servant into this room?" "I'm sorry," Chloe said quickly. "I knocked. You interrupted negotiations between families." "I know. That's why I was trying to leave." He grabbed her wrist, hard. "The help should remember their place." Pain shot through her arm. Her smile disappeared. Several Costa soldiers instantly reached for their weapons. Bellini's guards did the same. Metal clicked. Safety catches released. Within seconds, nearly 24 guns were aimed across the room. One wrong movement, one frightened trigger finger. Years of fragile peace would end inside a conference room. Luciano stood, slowly. No panic, no anger. Just complete control. "Release her." Bellini frowned. "She's only your housekeeper." Luciano looked directly into the older man's eyes. "No." One word. Quiet. Absolute. Then came the sentence that would change both their lives. "She's my wife." Everything stopped. Bellini released Chloe so quickly it was almost comical. His face drained of color. Several capos exchanged stunned glances. Someone actually whispered a prayer. Another hurriedly lowered his pistol. Bellini swallowed. "My apologies, Mrs. Costa." Chloe stared at Luciano. "Mrs. What?" Luciano walked toward her without hesitation. He gently took the folder from her trembling hands before slipping one arm naturally around her shoulders. His expression never changed. If anyone has a problem with my wife, his voice remained calm, they have a problem with me. Nobody volunteered. Not one. Instead, apologies echoed around the room. My mistake. We meant no disrespect. Our deepest apologies. Chloe blinked several times. Had everyone completely lost their minds? 5 minutes ago she had been invisible. Now hardened mafia bosses were apologizing because... Apparently she had become married without being consulted. Luciano nodded once. The meeting is over. Nobody argued. Within moments, the conference room emptied with remarkable speed. Men who had once stared down federal agents suddenly found urgent reasons to be somewhere else. Only Chloe and Luciano remained. The heavy doors closed. Silence settled. Luciano exhaled for what felt like the first time all afternoon. I'm sorry. Chloe looked at him. You, she pointed toward herself, married me. His lips almost twitched. Temporarily. I'm sorry? It prevented bloodshed. I appreciate that. She rubbed her wrist. But couldn't you have said I was your cousin? No. Your lawyer? No. Your accountant? No. She folded her arms. So your brain skipped every possible explanation and landed on wife? For reasons I can't fully explain. He paused. Yes. She stared another second. Then, despite everything, she laughed. Not politely. Not nervously. She laughed so hard she had to hold the table. Luciano blinked. Nobody laughed around him. Ever. You realize, Chloe managed between breaths, that somewhere in this city, someone is probably planning us an anniversary party. His expression grew thoughtful. That is, unfortunately, possible. She laughed even harder. For the first time in years, Luciano Costa felt something inside his carefully controlled world shift. It was strange, unexpected, dangerously warm. Then his phone vibrated. He answered, listened, closed his eyes, very slowly. What happened? Chloe asked. His security chief spoke loudly enough through the phone that even she heard fragments. Every family has already been informed. Congratulatory gifts arriving. The press outside the estate. Luciano lowered the phone. They believed me. You mean everyone? How many is everyone? He looked toward the window. Approximately every organized crime family on the East Coast. Chloe's smile vanished. Oh. A long pause. Oh no. Neither of them realized that somewhere across the city, an elegant woman named Celeste Romano had just received exactly the same news. She read a photograph of Luciano standing protectively beside an unfamiliar curvy woman. Her crystal wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered across the floor. Impossible. Luciano Costa was supposed to marry her. Not a housekeeper. Her eyes hardened. If that woman thinks she can steal my future, she folded the newspaper with terrifying precision. She has no idea what kind of war she just started. The Costa estate had survived assassination attempts, federal raids, gang wars, 3 generations of blood feuds. Yet by sunrise, its greatest crisis arrived in the form of 12 enormous gift baskets. Every single one was addressed to Mrs. Chloe Costa. Chloe stared at the mountain of flowers, chocolates, rare wines, imported tea, jewelry boxes, and handwritten congratulations filling the mansion's entrance hall. I think, she looked at the butler. Someone made a delivery mistake. The elderly butler smiled politely. No, Mrs. Costa. She winced. Please don't call me that. I'm afraid everyone already does. She sighed. This was going to be a very long day. Luciano entered the foyer precisely at 7 o'clock. His tie was perfect. His expression was perfectly composed. Only the slight shadow beneath his eyes betrayed that he had barely slept. His security chief, Matteo, handed him a tablet. The announcement has spread faster than expected. Luciano scanned the screen. Every allied family had sent congratulations. 3 rival organizations had postponed negotiations out of respect for the newlyweds. Someone had even commissioned a custom portrait of Luciano and Chloe, despite the fact no photograph of them together existed before yesterday. The artist had simply imagined one. Luciano closed the tablet. This has become inconvenient. Matteo raised an eyebrow. Inconvenient? You expected worse? I expected an international incident. Before Matteo could answer, Chloe appeared carrying one of the gift baskets. I think this cheese costs more than my car. Luciano almost smiled. Almost? There is something we need to discuss. I had a feeling that sentence was coming. They sat in the library. It was the quietest room in the mansion. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Sunlight spilled across polished wood. For the first time since yesterday, neither of them was surrounded by armed men. Luciano folded his hands. The alliance between our families remains fragile. Chloe nodded. I noticed the guns. If people discover I lied yesterday, they'll think you're weak. He looked at her with quiet surprise. Yes. And if they think you're weak, they'll start testing you. Correct. And eventually, people die. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She already understood. After a long silence, she asked quietly, What do you need me to do? Luciano hesitated. It wasn't something he did often. I need you to remain my wife. Her eyes widened again. For 1 week. Only one, until the alliance documents are finalized. She leaned back. You're asking a housekeeper to fool the most dangerous people on the East Coast. I'm asking the only person who already has. She blinked. I accidentally fooled them. Nevertheless. She rubbed her forehead. This is insane. Yes, I'll probably embarrass you. Very likely. I don't know rich people manners. I noticed. I eat pizza over the sink. I suspected. I still own socks with cartoon ducks. Luciano looked at her for several seconds. I failed to see the strategic concern. For the first time, she saw him intentionally make a joke. It was incredibly dry, almost invisible, but it was definitely a joke. She laughed. You've been waiting all morning to use that line. I had approximately 11 minutes. You rehearsed it. I deny everything. She smiled. That tiny moment erased more tension than either expected. Finally, she nodded. 1 week. Luciano extended his hand. 1 week. Instead, she shook with both hands. Warm, friendly, completely unlike the formal handshakes he received every day. Something tightened unexpectedly inside his chest. He ignored it. The following afternoon became Chloe's first lesson in becoming Mrs. Costa. Unfortunately, it went terribly. A retired family advisor spent 2 hours explaining the names and histories of every allied mafia family. There are 12 principal capos, Chloe repeated carefully. 12. Correct. And Don Alessandro must never be confused with Don Alberto. Got it? Never. 1 hour later, she entered the dining hall carrying fresh coffee. Good afternoon, Don Alphabet. Silence. Then, the 80-year-old capo burst into laughter so hard he nearly dropped his cane. I haven't laughed like that since 1987. Soon everyone around the table was laughing too. Even Luciano lowered his head to hide the corner of his mouth lifting. The mistake should have been offensive. Instead, it somehow made everyone relax. 2 days later, Luciano hosted another strategic meeting. This time, Chloe remembered every instruction. Walk slowly. Speak formally. Smile politely. Leave immediately. She made it through the first 3 steps perfectly.
Then she noticed something disturbing. Nobody had touched the food, not even Luciano. She frowned. Meeting after meeting, he skipped meals. Without thinking, she interrupted. "Excuse me." 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Luciano looked up. She crossed her arms. "You haven't eaten. I'm busy. So is everyone else. It can wait." "No." Another stunned silence. Nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever told Luciano Costa no. She picked up his untouched plate, returned 2 minutes later with a warm bowl of homemade tomato soup. You can negotiate while chewing. One capo nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Luciano looked at the soup, then at Chloe, then back at the soup. Finally, he picked up the spoon. The room relaxed almost instantly. One by one, everyone else began eating too. Within minutes, a meeting usually filled with shouting transformed into something strangely normal. People discussed business, shared bread, asked for more soup. Someone requested the recipe. Another admitted his grandchildren would love the homemade biscuits Chloe had baked that morning. Luciano quietly observed the change. For years, he had ruled through discipline, fear, precision. Yet somehow, one cheerful housekeeper, carrying soup, had created something none of his strategies ever managed. People looked comfortable. That evening, Matteo found Luciano standing alone on the terrace. The men seem happier. They're distracted. They're human. Luciano remained silent. Matteo smiled knowingly. "Interesting woman," Luciano answered automatically. "Temporary arrangement. Of course. 1 week. Naturally. You appear skeptical. I've guarded you for 15 years. And I've never once seen you finish an entire bowl of soup." Luciano looked toward the brightly lit kitchen window. Inside, Chloe was laughing with the housekeeping staff while flour covered half the counter. She was teaching one of the younger maids how to make cinnamon rolls. Her laughter drifted through the open window. Without realizing it, Luciano remained standing there far longer than necessary. Across the kitchen, Chloe happened to glance outside. She smiled and waved. Luciano gave the smallest nod in return, before quietly walking away. Neither of them noticed several veteran capos watching the exchange from another hallway. One old soldier folded his arms. "I've worked for the boss 30 years. So, I've never seen him stop walking just to watch someone laugh." Another capo grinned. "1 week?" The first man chuckled. "I'll believe that when the wedding anniversary arrives." By the 4th day, the Costa estate no longer felt like the cold fortress it had been for years. The marble hallways still echoed with disciplined footsteps. The guards still stood perfectly still. The meetings were still protected by armed security. But something invisible had changed. People smiled. Not often. Not loudly. Just enough to notice. One maid hummed while polishing the staircase. The kitchen staff argued over whose turn it was to bake with Chloe. Even Matteo, whose face normally suggested permanent disappointment with humanity, had accepted a second cinnamon roll without pretending he didn't enjoy it. Nobody understood how one cheerful housekeeper had accomplished what decades of leadership never had. Least of all, Luciano. Friday morning began with an audit. A visiting financial specialist from an allied family arrived carrying several briefcases. His name was Adrian Russo, 35, polite, soft-spoken, the opposite of nearly every mafia soldier Chloe had met that week. She greeted him with coffee. "I hope you like cinnamon." He looked surprised. "I love cinnamon." "Perfect." She placed fresh rolls on the table. "They're still warm." Adrian took one bite. His eyes widened. "Mrs. Costa." She immediately waved her hands. "Please call me Chloe." He smiled warmly. "Chloe,
These are honestly the best cinnamon rolls I've ever tasted." She laughed. "Either you're very kind, or you've had terrible cinnamon rolls your whole life. I promise I'm telling the truth." Neither of them noticed Luciano entering from the opposite doorway. He stopped, watched Adrian smiling, watched Chloe laugh. Something unfamiliar tightened inside his chest. Matteo, standing quietly beside him, noticed immediately. "Oh!" Luciano didn't look away. "What?" "I know that expression. I have an expression. You do today." Luciano answered without emotion. "The audit requires closer supervision." "It does?" "Yes." Matteo looked toward Adrian. "He audits books." Luciano nodded. "Very dangerous." Matteo blinked. "The accounting?" "The accountant." Without another word, Luciano walked into the room. "Mr. Russo." Adrian stood immediately. "Boss Costa. I've decided to personally oversee today's financial review." The accountant looked confused. "That's certainly not necessary." "It is now." Chloe frowned. "I thought you hated paperwork." "I've developed an interest." "When?" "Just now." She shrugged. "Good for you." For the next 3 hours, Luciano sat less than 6 feet away while Adrian worked. Whenever Adrian attempted casual conversation with Chloe, Luciano somehow interrupted. "Could I trouble you for another coffee?" "I'll get it." "No need." Luciano stood first. 5 minutes later. "Your cinnamon rolls really are remarkable. The balance sheets require attention." Another interruption. Then another. Then another. By lunchtime, Adrian quietly leaned toward Matteo. "Have I done something wrong?" Matteo struggled heroically not to smile. "No." "Then why does the boss keep appearing every time I speak?" Matteo considered the question. "I honestly believe—" He lowered his voice. "He doesn't know." The following afternoon, the estate hosted several long-time family friends. Among them was 80-year-old Father Antonio, a retired priest who had known Luciano since childhood. Unlike everyone else, he feared absolutely no one, including mafia bosses. Chloe poured him tea. He smiled kindly. "My dear." She looked up. "Yes." "You have the brightest smile this house has seen in decades." She blushed. "That's sweet. It reminds people they're alive." Across the room, Luciano looked over. Father Antonio continued. "And your laughter." Luciano suddenly appeared beside them. "Father." The old priest smiled knowingly. "Luciano. The doctor said you shouldn't drink too much tea." "I've had 1 cup. Too much caffeine. This is herbal." Luciano paused. "Too many herbs." Father Antonio stared at him, then burst into laughter. "My boy." He leaned closer. "Are you interrupting me?" "No. You've interrupted me 3 times. I'm protecting security." The priest looked around. "From me?" Luciano remained perfectly serious. "Potentially." Father Antonio turned toward Chloe. "My dear." She smiled. "Yes? I've watched this stubborn young man since he was 10. And I've never once seen him jealous." Luciano answered immediately. "I'm not jealous." The priest chuckled. "I didn't say your name." Unfortunately, several veteran capos overheard everything. That evening they gathered in the security office. One of them placed $20 on the table. "I say tomorrow the boss interrupts 5 conversations." Another shook his head. 7, 8, 10. Matteo walked in. "What are we doing?" "The usual." He looked at the money. "You're betting on the boss?" "We're betting on his jealousy." Matteo sighed. "This feels disrespectful." The oldest capo nodded. "It absolutely is." He placed $50 onto the pile. "I'll take over 12 interruptions." Meanwhile, The only person completely unaware of the game was Chloe herself. She found Luciano reviewing paperwork after dinner. "You've been following me around a lot. I have responsibilities." "I know." She smiled warmly. "I really appreciate how seriously you take security." He looked up. "Security? You never let strangers bother me." She laughed. "I guess being married to a mafia boss comes with excellent customer service." Luciano stared at her. She honestly believed that. She truly thought every interruption, every suspicious glance, every unnecessary appearance was simply part of his job. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't encouraging him. She wasn't even noticing, which somehow made everything worse. After she left, Matteo entered, carrying another stack of reports. The betting pool reached $400. Luciano frowned. What betting pool? Matteo decided honesty was safest. "The men are predicting how many conversations you'll interrupt tomorrow." Silence. Luciano slowly removed his glasses. "They're gambling?" "Yes." "On my schedule." Matteo nodded. "In a manner of speaking." Luciano leaned back. "I do not interrupt conversations." At that exact moment, one young guard hurried inside. "Boss." "Yes?" "Mrs. Costa is speaking with the florist." Luciano stood immediately. "I should verify the delivery." He walked straight out. Matteo looked toward the doorway, then quietly reached into his wallet. He placed another $20 into the betting jar. 12 interruptions, he whispered. "I should have gone higher." Across town, Celeste Romano spread several documents across a polished mahogany desk. Photographs, guest lists, property records. She examined every detail with cold precision. Then one paper caught her attention. Marriage records. She searched again. Nothing. No marriage license, no civil registration, no church ceremony. Her lips curved into a slow smile. "So," she whispered, "there never was a wedding." She stood and walked toward the window. Outside, rain began falling over the city. "Luciano," her voice carried quiet satisfaction. "You may have fooled the mafia." She carefully folded the documents into a leather folder. "But you haven't fooled me." A dangerous smile spread across her face. "And very soon." She looked toward the Costa estate in the distance. "Everyone will discover your perfect little wife was nothing but a lie." The invitation arrived on a quiet Monday morning. It bore no return address, only a black wax seal pressed with the insignia of the Romano family. Matteo delivered it directly to Luciano's office. "The Romano family requests the presence of every major mafia leader this Friday." Luciano broke the seal. His expression remained unreadable until he reached the final sentence. "Attendance of Mr. and Mrs. Luciano Costa is respectfully expected." He slowly folded the letter. "Celeste," Matteo nodded. "She's making her move." Across town, Celeste Romano stood before several influential family representatives. "I've invited everyone." One elderly don frowned. "For what purpose?" "For the truth." "And what truth would that be?" She smiled. "The woman Luciano calls his wife." She placed a stack of official government documents on the table. "Doesn't legally exist as Mrs. Costa." The room fell silent. No marriage license. No church record. No civil registration. She looked around confidently. When the truth is revealed in front of every family, Luciano's credibility will collapse. One don hesitated. "You're certain?" "I've checked 3 times. Another slowly nodded. "If the boss lied, he loses respect." "And respect," Celeste answered calmly, "is everything." Back at the Costa estate, Chloe overheard enough of the conversation to understand exactly what was happening. She didn't mean to eavesdrop. She had simply been carrying fresh towels past Luciano's office when Matteo quietly said, "If she exposes the lie publicly." Luciano finished the sentence. The alliance could unravel. Chloe stood frozen in the hallway. She didn't hear anything else. She didn't need to. For several minutes she remained motionless. Then she quietly walked away. That evening, the mansion felt unusually peaceful. The staff laughed over dinner. Someone played soft piano music in another room. A few guards argued about baseball scores. Life continued normally. Only Chloe couldn't enjoy any of it. She sat alone in the laundry room, folding fresh sheets. The familiar work usually comforted her. Tonight, nothing did. She whispered to herself. It was only supposed to be 1 week. She smiled sadly. I forgot. Forgot what? That none of this had ever been real. The warm breakfasts, the shared jokes, watching Luciano secretly enjoy homemade soup, his awkward attempts at humor, the way the staff had slowly begun calling her Mrs. Costa with genuine affection instead of obligation. She had known it was temporary. Somewhere along the way, her heart hadn't received the message. Late that night, she opened the small bedroom the estate had given her. Everything she owned fit into 2 modest suitcases. She folded her favorite sweater, packed her worn cookbook, wrapped the cartoon duck socks she had once joked about. Then she paused. On the dresser rested a framed photograph. Not a wedding picture. Simply one taken by a maid a few days earlier. Luciano stood beside her in the kitchen. She was laughing. He wasn't smiling exactly, but he was looking only at her. She touched the edge of the frame. I should have known better. A tear escaped before she quickly wiped it away. No crying. She forced herself to laugh. Waterproof mascara is expensive. The next morning, she requested a private meeting. Luciano found her waiting in the greenhouse. Sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling. Flowers surrounded them in quiet silence. She held both suitcases beside her feet. His eyes immediately noticed them. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. She nodded. I think it's the right thing. The gathering hasn't happened yet. Exactly. She smiled gently. If I leave now, you'll avoid the scandal. It won't erase the lie. No. She looked down. But maybe people will blame me instead of you. Luciano stared at her. You believe I'd allow that? You shouldn't have to choose. I already did. She looked up. When? The moment I said you were my wife. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, she whispered, I'm just your housekeeper. No. His answer came immediately. You stopped being just anything a long time ago. She swallowed hard. You deserve someone born into your world. Luciano looked almost puzzled. My world? The expensive suits, the power, the meetings, the families. She smiled sadly. I still label leftovers with masking tape. I've seen. I buy shampoo because it's on sale. I know. I still help the maids because it makes me happy. I know. She laughed through tears. See? We're completely different. Luciano took one slow step closer. I disagree. She waited. You protect people. So do I. You tell uncomfortable truths. So do I. You put everyone else's needs before your own. His voice softened. So do I. She could no longer answer. Before either of them could say another word, Matteo hurried into the greenhouse. Boss, Luciano turned. They've moved the gathering forward. When? Tonight. Both of them froze. So soon? Chloe whispered. Matteo nodded grimly. Every major family has already arrived. Celeste had changed the schedule deliberately. She wanted Luciano to have no time to prepare, no opportunity to create another lie, only one choice: face everyone. That evening, the Romano estate glittered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers. Luxury cars filled the courtyard. Dozens of mafia leaders entered wearing tailored suits and guarded expressions. Whispers spread through the ballroom. "Where's Mrs. Costa? Will she come? Have you heard the rumors?" Near the entrance, Chloe quietly stood beside Luciano. She wore a simple, navy blue evening dress borrowed from one of the household staff. Nothing extravagant. Nothing covered in diamonds. Yet somehow, she looked more elegant than many women wearing fortunes around their necks. Luciano glanced toward her. "Nervous?" She laughed softly. "I'm considering pretending to faint. It won't work. You'd catch me." "Yes," she smiled. "I knew it." For a brief second, the noise around them disappeared. Then the ballroom doors opened. A servant announced loudly, "Miss Celeste Romano." Celeste entered with complete confidence. Her silver gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers. She carried a leather folder beneath one arm. Exactly as planned. She smiled politely at every guest, then finally stopped in front of Luciano and Chloe. "Good evening," Luciano answered calmly. "Celeste," she turned toward Chloe. "What a pleasure." "It is?" Chloe asked honestly. For the first time that evening, several nearby guests struggled not to laugh. Celeste ignored the comment. Instead, she slowly raised the folder. "I believe," her smile widened. "It's time everyone learned the truth." The entire ballroom fell silent. The ballroom fell completely silent. No music. No conversations. Only the faint sound of crystal glasses settling onto polished tables. Celeste Romano slowly opened the leather folder. Her confidence filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she looked directly at Luciano before turning toward the assembled mafia leaders. "We have all spent the past week congratulating a marriage that never actually happened." Murmurs spread across the crowd. Several capos exchanged uneasy glances. Celeste removed a stack of official documents. "I obtained records from every appropriate office." She held them high enough for everyone to see. "There is no marriage license." Another paper. "No church ceremony." Another. "No civil registration." She smiled triumphantly. "The woman standing beside Luciano Costa has been pretending to be his wife." The whispers grew louder. One don frowned. Another shook his head in disappointment. Someone quietly muttered, "If this is true..." The boss lied. Respect, trust, authority. Everything Luciano had spent years building seemed to balance on a single moment. Chloe felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward her. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. This was exactly what she had hoped to prevent. She stepped forward before Luciano could speak. "I'm sorry." The room quieted again. "I never wanted to deceive anyone." She looked around at the gathered families. "I only agreed because..." Her voice trembled. "Because people could have died." She forced herself to continue. "None of this was my idea." She laughed softly through her tears. "I was just the housekeeper who happened to carry the wrong folder into the wrong room." A few people lowered their eyes. Others remained unconvinced. Chloe took a slow breath. "I'll leave tonight." She looked toward Luciano. "You don't have to defend me anymore. It was never fair that my mistake became your burden." Then she turned toward the doors, ready to walk away, ready to disappear before his reputation suffered any further. "Chloe." Luciano's voice stopped her instantly. She turned back. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking only at her. "Stay." One simple word. She couldn't move. Luciano stepped into the center of the ballroom, His posture remained calm. His voice never rose. "Miss Romano is correct." The room erupted. "So it was a lie. I knew it. This changes everything." Luciano simply waited. He had mastered the art of silence long before he mastered negotiation. Gradually, the room quieted again. Then he continued. "There was never a wedding." Celeste smiled. Victory. Exactly as she had planned. She folded her arms confidently. "I appreciate your honesty." Luciano nodded once. "There simply hasn't been one." He paused. Yet, the ballroom froze. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Even Celeste's confident smile disappeared. "What?" Luciano turned toward Chloe. For the first time since anyone in the room had ever known him, the feared mafia boss looked uncertain. Not weak, not frightened. Simply hopeful. "The first time I called you my wife." His eyes never left hers. "I was trying to stop a war." Chloe felt tears gathering again. He took another step closer. Every day after that, a faint smile finally appeared on his face. I found myself hoping the lie would become true. Complete silence. Then, to the astonishment of every person present, Luciano Costa knelt. A dozen capos instinctively took one step backward. Surely they were imagining this. The most feared man on the East Coast, kneeling for love. He reached into his jacket. Everyone expected a flawless velvet box. Instead, he frowned. One moment, he searched another pocket, then another. Finally, he produced a slightly crushed ring box. The corners were bent. The ribbon had somehow become tangled around the hinge. Luciano stared at it with visible disappointment. He sighed quietly, appear to have mishandled this. For 2 full seconds, nobody reacted. Then Father Antonio laughed, loudly. One capo snorted, another covered his mouth. Soon the entire ballroom was laughing, not cruelly, warmly, affectionately. Even Matteo quietly wiped tears from his eyes. "The boss," one soldier whispered, "lost a fight with his own pocket." Chloe laughed through happy tears. "You planned everything." She pointed toward the crushed ring box. "Except where to keep the ring." Luciano closed his eyes briefly. "I've negotiated peace treaties." Another ripple of laughter spread across the room. "I've ended family wars." More laughter. "I've faced men pointing guns at my head." He looked directly into Chloe's eyes. "I have never." His voice became almost impossibly gentle. "Been more terrified than I am right now." The room disappeared. The chandeliers, the guests, the politics. None of it mattered anymore. Only the 2 of them remained. Luciano opened the slightly damaged box. Inside rested a simple diamond ring. Elegant. Not excessive. Exactly the kind of ring someone chose because they were thinking about the woman, not the audience. He took a careful breath. "Chloe Mercer, you once told me everyone deserves somewhere they belong." She stared at him. "I didn't realize I was listening." "You always listen." He smiled. "I simply needed time to understand that." Another pause. "I don't want one more week. I don't want one more lie. I don't want a temporary wife." His voice softened again. "I want mornings where you remind me to eat. I want arguments about soup. I want cartoon duck socks left beside my shoes." Laughter echoed once more. "I want to spend the rest of my life being told when I'm impossible." His eyes glistened. "Will you marry me?" Chloe didn't answer immediately. She walked toward him, very slowly, until she stood directly in front of him. She placed one hand against his cheek. "When you first called me your wife," she whispered, I thought it was the craziest thing anyone had ever done. Luciano nodded. It probably was. She smiled through tears, but somewhere between homemade soup, your terrible jokes, and watching the most feared mafia boss in America pretend he wasn't jealous. The ballroom erupted with laughter again. Luciano looked genuinely confused. I was never jealous. From the back of the room, one veteran capo shouted, "I won $300 because you interrupted 14 conversations." The room exploded with laughter. Even Luciano rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I'll be reviewing everyone's salaries." "No, you won't," several guards answered together. More laughter. Chloe shook her head affectionately. "You see?" She squeezed his hand. "They're not afraid of you anymore." Luciano looked around. The men who had once followed him because of fear now smiled because they were happy for him. For the first time in years, the Costa family looked less like an organization and more like a family. Chloe looked back at him. "My answer," she smiled, "is yes." Thunderous applause filled the ballroom. Several capos stood. Others whistled. Father Antonio wiped his eyes. Matteo quietly handed the oldest guard the betting money. "You won. I told you it wasn't ending after 1 week." 3 months later. The wedding took place in the gardens of the Costa estate, not because tradition demanded it, because Chloe loved the flowers. The ceremony was surprisingly simple. The reception was anything but. Every employee attended. Every capo attended. Even families who had once considered one another enemies shared tables. The housekeepers cried harder than anyone. Matteo denied crying. Nobody believed him. Life settled into something wonderfully ordinary. Chloe officially became Mrs. Costa. Yet every Tuesday morning she still helped polish silver with the housekeeping staff. Whenever anyone reminded her she no longer had to work, she answered exactly the same way. "I know. I just like being with my people." No one argued, because everyone understood. She had never wanted power, only belonging. Luciano changed too. He still commanded respect with a single glance. He still negotiated impossible alliances. He still terrified anyone foolish enough to threaten his family. But every afternoon, he appeared in the kitchen exactly 5 minutes before Chloe removed fresh pastries from the oven, claiming he was inspecting security. No one believed that either, especially not Chloe. One sunny afternoon, a newly recruited guard watched the boss unsuccessfully trying to fold laundry. He somehow managed to make a fitted sheet look even more complicated. Chloe laughed. "Gently. You're wrestling it." "I believe it's winning," Luciano admitted. The young guard leaned toward one of the veteran capos. "Is it true that the boss married a housekeeper?" The older man smiled. "No." The recruit looked confused. "No." The veteran watched Chloe patiently unfold Luciano's latest disaster before slipping her hand into his. He married the only woman brave enough to tell him when he was being impossible. Across the courtyard, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast accepted another lesson on folding laundry without the slightest complaint. Not because he had lost authority, because he had finally found someone worth listening to. The lie that had once prevented a war had become the greatest truth of his life.